Hello, everybody. My name is Tom, and this is the Trans Life Podcast. Welcome back, or welcome for the very first time, depending on what the case may be. So, we are back with another episode of the Trans Life Podcast. The last episode was unfortunately beset upon by a small legion of transphobes because I am, after all, guilty of the heinous crime of being a trans person existing on the internet. If you would like to know a little more about what transpired, head over to the video on my YouTube page entitled A Sincere Thank You to You, Transphobic Internet Commenters, where you will find a 100% genuine, in no way sarcastic message to those individuals. Or you can check out the following video, Why I Will Delete Your Comments, in which I talk about the fact that I am in no way obligated to provide a platform for transphobic talking points on my channel, and thus I will happily and without regret delete any such comments immediately. Okay, so now that that is out of the way, let's get into today's episode. So I did debate with myself about whether or not to talk about this, but it is something that's been on my mind lately, and I do think it's important to talk about, so that is what we will be doing. So the topic of the day, the thing we will be discussing in this episode is detransitioning. So if you're not familiar with the terminology, transitioning is when a trans person starts to make that shift from being seen as one gender to being seen as the one they actually identify with. So, for example, for a trans girl, this would maybe mean like wearing makeup, growing out their hair, wearing more feminine clothing, changing their name, starting hormone therapy, having surgery, things like that. So transitioning usually just involves bringing your outward self as closely to the truth of your inward self as you can. So detransitioning, thus, is the same thing, but in reverse. So it's a word we use to describe the situation of a person who thought they were trans and either began or completed the transitioning process, and then later realized they were not trans and decided to go back to living as their gender assigned at birth. So, for example, if the trans girl we mentioned before spent some time living as a woman and then came to the realization that it didn't actually feel quite right, maybe they're actually non-binary, or maybe they're just a cis man who enjoys expressing himself more femininely. Whatever the case, they've realized that they're not trans and will be undoing or attempting to undo the changes they made when they transitioned in the first place. So now there's a lot of nuance and gray area to this discussion, and I'm going to do my best to be mindful of that and respectful of that. And I do ask that if you choose to comment on this episode, you try to do the same thing. So thank you in advance for that. Okay, now I follow a lot of trans, non-binary, and just gender non-conforming people online, and I have seen a range of reactions to people who detransition. So some trans people feel betrayed or disappointed, like the detransitioning person is turning their back on the community, while others are more understanding, and some just feel kind of uncomfortable about the whole thing. Personally, I think that discovering the truth of yourself and your gender is a journey, and it's completely okay if that journey leads you down roads that turn out to be incorrect, because that's how you know when you found the right road. But I think it's natural as a trans person to feel a little off balance or uncomfortable around the subject of detransitioning for many reasons, but for two in particular. So first, unfortunately, people who detransition are often used as a weapon by transphobes to prove that being trans is a phase or a social contagion or whatever it is they personally believe. Second, I don't know a single trans person, including myself, who has not had at least one moment of asking themselves, like, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm not really trans? I mean, there are probably some trans folks out there who have never had a moment of self-doubt, But when so much of society is constantly saying, you're wrong, you're unnatural, how you're feeling isn't real, it's practically impossible not to wonder, even in the back of your mind, if they might be right. It sucks, and it's obviously not true, but it's one of those intrusive thoughts that I think is pretty common for people in the trans community. If you're secretly afraid that the people saying horrible things about you are right, then hearing about someone detransitioning can be pretty terrifying. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that A, the number of people actually detransitioning is statistically incredibly low, and B, there are a lot of reasons why people detransition, and I don't think I'm actually trans is often not the reason. Many times, the reason people detransition is more of a reaction to how difficult society makes life for trans people and not because they've suddenly stopped being trans. So I'll tell you about this from my own experience because I did do a sort of detransitioning when I was in college. So for those who haven't watched or listened to previous episodes or just don't know the story, I first realized I was trans when I was around 19 or 20 years old when I was in college. But the backlash from people in my life was so strong that I ended up walking it back and going back into the closet for like the next 20 years. So, I had realized that I was trans and I'd started kind of dipping my toes into the waters of transitioning. Like, I cut my hair short, I started wearing more masculine clothing, and I even had a few accounts online under male names that I used to feel more authentically myself. But unfortunately, my mom in particular had some really set ideas about how a girl should look and act. And as a result, I started to associate some really negative feelings with anything masculine in regards to myself. And so it didn't all happen at once, but with so much negative reinforcement going against me and with just wanting to feel accepted and not judged by my mom and people in general, I decided I didn't want to be trans. And so I did some pretty impressive mental gymnastics to convince myself that I wasn't. And, I grew my hair out. I started wearing super femme clothing and even like dating just guys because, why be trans and queer when I could be cis and straight, right? So the point I'm making here is that for a lot of people who detransition, the reason they're doing so isn't because they're no longer trans, but because they're tired. They're tired of the constant hate, the constant struggle, the disapproval or rejection of friends and family. I mean, if we lived in a world where transitioning was looked at with the same attitude as someone trying out a new hairstyle or changing up their fashion or getting a tattoo or trying out a new nickname, getting plastic surgery, if we could just accept that exploring your gender is as natural as exploring anything else about yourself, then I feel pretty confident in saying that we would have a lot fewer detransitioners as a result. So let's talk a bit more about the first reason why talk of detransitioning makes a lot of trans people uncomfortable. And this is, unfortunately, the more damaging part. So one of the favorite lines of transphobic people is that most people who transition regret it. So this is, of course, blatantly false based on both actual data and the lived experience of pretty much every trans person I have ever met. But it's one of those instances where they feel like it should be true, and thus it must be. But regardless, detransitioners are some of the transphobic brigade's favorite people because not only do they prove that being trans is something people regret, but unfortunately, a lot of detransitioners can be convinced to parrot transphobic talking points and make the cause that no one should be able to transition just because it didn't work out for them. I'm not going to name names, but I will say that a comic artist I've followed for several years recently came out as having detransitioned. And the community response, mostly trans people, was very positive until they finished their post by saying that they were now convinced that testosterone was terrible and unsafe and should not be taken by anyone. Now, I have nothing but sympathy for that person, that their experience on testosterone was so negative. And I'm glad that they're figuring out more about who they are and what feels right to them. But making the blanket statement that testosterone is unsafe or that no one should medically transition because it wasn't right for you, that's not good. That's not great. And there are so many people who testosterone has literally been life-saving, myself included. And, people who wake up every day feeling more authentically themselves than ever before because of hormone therapy. So I'm very confused as to who this person has been talking to and why they've come to the conclusion that their own experience negates the experience of so many others. It's kind of like, so I cannot have onion or garlic. I still do because they're delicious, but when I eat too much of them, I feel absolutely horrible and sick and regret all my life choices, but still eat those foods again at the next opportunity. Realizing that I personally should avoid those foods is perfectly logical. But coming out and saying that onion and garlic are bad for everyone just because my personal body doesn't react well to them, that's not so logical. Because something that is wrong for me could very well be absolutely right for someone else. So to give another example, there was a fairly high-profile person a few months ago, or possibly maybe over a year ago. Time has no meaning. I'm lost in its void. But yeah, so this person was just all over transphobic Twitter because they had started taking testosterone and had experienced some male pattern baldness as a result of it. Like they'd lost their hairline had gone way back. And so they then detransitioned and posted pictures of themselves along with these heartfelt pleas for people to recognize that testosterone is dangerous and does horrible things to people. And I'm definitely not thrilled about the idea of possibly losing my hair, but I've recently experienced losing a lot of my hair as a result of an unfortunate haircut. But yeah, that's not something that's specific to trans people on testosterone. That's just a universal thing with people who have a certain level of testosterone in their bodies. Our current beauty standards definitely sway in favor of people with hair. And so I can understand being unhappy with going on testosterone and very quickly losing your hair. But that does happen to cis guys too. I think the person in question was in their early 20s, and yeah, that's pretty early to lose your hair, but it does definitely happen. This person just unfortunately had a genetic heritage that caused early male pattern baldness, and it sucks that something happened to their body that they didn't enjoy, but that's not a case of testosterone behaving other than how it should, or being dangerous or bad. Anyone going on testosterone receives just a massive amount of information regarding all the changes that will happen or could happen, positive and negative. I would say even with an emphasis on the negative. So it's not even a case of like they had no idea that this could happen. Anyway, again, nothing but sympathy for a person having things happen to their body that they didn't want. And if this person is happier living as a cis woman, then that's great. I'm happy for them. But again, where the issue comes in is that they used their experience as a reason why no one should transition. And that's why transphobes were sharing this person's photo and story all over the internet, because it backs up everything that they are always saying. Everyone regrets transitioning. Hormones are dangerous and bad. Being trans is a social contagion or a mental illness or something along those lines. So, yes. So as I said before, I definitely think the subject of detransitioning is a nuanced one. Realizing who you truly are and what kind of life makes you happy is something that should be celebrated. And I feel nothing but empathy for anyone who realizes that the gender they're currently living as doesn't fit them. I mean, that's at the heart of the whole trans experience, right? But where I draw the line, where it becomes not okay, is when someone makes the mistake of assuming that because transitioning was not right for them, it's not right for anyone. And I mean, living as someone who has detransitioned, especially if permanent changes have been made to your body, I'm sure it can be difficult. Like, you're essentially living as a trans person in the eyes of the world, even if you're actually living according to your gender assigned at birth. Like, you could be a cis woman with a deep voice and facial hair, or a cis man with breasts, and the same transphobes who were against you transitioning are now going to be against you for not matching their perfect ideal of what men and women should look like. So I can understand feeling angry about that and blaming the concept of transitioning or the idea of transness for how you're feeling. But it's the people who make life miserable for gender nonconforming people who are making this bad for you. It's not trans people. Like, we are just trying to quietly live our lives and be who we are. So please don't take this out on us. Be yourself. Detransition if that's what's right for you. But understand that just because something wasn't right for you, that doesn't mean it's not absolutely brilliant and life-saving for other people. And that's about all I have to say on that for now anyway. So as a reminder, comments on the YouTube video version of this episode will be moderated, so keep that in mind prior to composing your 2,000-word dissertation about the evils of trans people. So to all the rest of you, thank you so much for listening, and I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, so please feel free to leave a comment if you feel so inclined. Okay, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time.